If you have ever gotten in the habit of looking back at your day and recognizing that you've done everything except for the one thing you promised yourself you would do that day, then this video is for you. This month, we are centering our theme around small, simple acts of devotion as an antidote to self sabotage. We're going to get into what I mean by self sabotage because it is not the big bombs that we throw up in our life. They're often little subtle acts of sort of that cut us down and stop us from becoming and or showing up as the version of ourselves that we want to be. So I'm Jessie Raspiller. I'm a somatic healer and herbalist. And each month I take time to share some simple embodied somatic practices that help us overcome the patternings of everyday life, such as continuous stress, patternings of self-destruction, you name it. All those little symptoms we get into that really stop us from showing up from here. So I want to share a little story of my own day today because it is a perfect example of what self-sabotage can really look like. So I come and I work in a very heart-centered space and I show up for individuals all day. And part of being able to reach a further audience this year is me knowing and recognizing that I want to create more content that can reach others, especially in an accessible platform like YouTube. And so I've had this video planned out for a long time. I found myself in the really big feels of a lot of the things that are going on in the external world. And when that happens, I really want to withhold and I really want to draw in. And I found myself in this tug of war today of doing everything except for this one thing that I wanted to do. I went as far as sharing with somebody that I would help them build their website, deciding that maybe I should clean out behind the dryer. I got all the dishes done, the dog got her walk, and I got to lunchtime and realized what I was doing. I wasn't holding myself in this delicate space of what do you need to show up right now. If the world feels hard, if you are feeling a lot of emotions, let's sit with those for a moment, right? So self-sabotage is often these small little acts that we take in a very subtle sometimes, but oftentimes very destructive way that takes us out of the patternings of the things that are actually productive in a positive way, in a compassionate way, in a true aligned way, right? And when we think about devotion as being the antidote to this, we think about how we can first recognize those times when we've come into a space of avoidance. That's step number one, right? Is starting to get this deeper level of self-awareness to a point where we can recognize and say, hold on, I see what you're doing. You are giving before you've filled, right? You continuously press out that masculine energy when you actually really haven't filled up that feminine essence, that spring of life within you. And once we've recognized the avoidance that we're in, and sometimes that can go on for several hours or maybe even several days in a row, but there's these tender moments that can start to happen. And this is where the acts of devotion come in for this month. And so what I did for myself, when I recognized that, Jessie, you are doing everything except for creating this video that could potentially reach others, that are the cup that you want to fill up for yourself so that you can pour into others in this really, really positive way. And so when I caught myself in that moment, and this isn't a reprimandable catching myself, but just I recognized myself in a moment. It's maybe a more constructive way to say that. I recognized the patterning that I was in. I asked myself to go sit down in a really tender way, the way that we would ask a 3-year-old child who's just learning the ways of the world. Because essentially what we are doing in these recognized patternings is seeing a part of ourselves that in our formative years maybe didn't have the tools and or had trauma impressions or painful impressions that keep us now in these loops and these pattern forms that we perpetuate. And so if we can tenderize the moments of recognitions that we have when we are facilitating experiences that aren't in our most aligned self, it's important to be tender. So I tenderized myself. I said, Jessie, let's go sit on the couch and have a little chat. And I asked myself 3 questions. I started with, first of all, what are you feeling? And there was an assortment of things that I was feeling. And it wasn't about getting to root cause in that moment, but just noticing, like, okay, I'm feeling some sadness, and my heart's really tender right now. And when my heart's really tender, it's hard to go pour outwards because I haven't poured inwards. And then I'll get back to this in a second, right? Because this is a perpetual loop of mine, is that I need to be still, I need to be held in this moment. But then sometimes those holding patterns for me can look like stopping the momentum that I'm in. And there's two thoughts on that, but let's keep going. So asking myself the emotions. The second question was, what would happen if you didn't, in this instance, create this video today, or if you didn't take the action, the small act of devotion, the promise that you've made yourself today? What if you didn't keep that promise? And it's like, well, I can do it tomorrow. But the truth is, tomorrow is my one day off that I have really set aside, and I really want to honor that for myself. That feels very devotional in itself too. So really, it's I either need to do this, or I'm going to sabotage the experience, and I'm going to do it really rushed, and maybe not with the tenderness that I want to show up in. And so then the third question I asked was, what would happen if you did do this? And I got a little excited because I was like, oh, it would be really great evidence to have in my back pocket for, even though I'm feeling tender, that I can still show up. I can show up when the emotions are big, and I can hold space within myself, because oftentimes when I'm sharing these experiences, I'm receiving a lot of messages that I need. And as those are pouring through me, I get to verbalize them in a way that potentially could reach others. And so for me, sharing my medicine is often receiving my medicine. And I got a little excited then, because I was like, oh, this would actually be a really beautiful way to tend to all my big feelings. And I also want to recognize there's a form of bypassing that comes when we push past our emotions as well. And so I want you, that's where the second two questions come in mind, is like, sometimes asking what would happen if I don't do this could in itself be an act of devotion, right? And having that tenderness to say, I actually need to slow down today, and this in itself is the devotion. For me, I recognize the patterning of stalling, and recognizing that actually the best medicine for me was to move forward with inspired action. So I hope these questions help. I'll put these in the show notes. But again, it's what are you feeling? What would happen if you don't do this? And what would happen if you do this? And these are just little simple things that we can do when we experience ourselves in those moments of running from the things that really are truly important to us, or things that we want to find the inspired action to move forward in, but feel really stuck in some of our own patterning and maybe looping mechanisms. So as you can see, getting into this topic now, devotion as the antidote to self-sabotage, oftentimes the acts of devotion are as simple in experience as the small little acts of sabotage that we're doing, right? It didn't take me long to recognize that my true potential in that moment was to move forward and to still be within that duality of my own emotions. I can be feeling them right now. And part of that really heart squishiness is part of what I'm pouring into this video for each of you to feel the truth of a practitioner in their own practice. And so devotional acts, they can look like those morning rituals and spending 20 minutes in meditation, and that's really wonderful. But once we get into our day and the noises get really loud, how can we show up in the smallness of the moments and that tenderness in the moments, and really hold ourselves so that we can continue to move forward, or we can recognize pause is the best medicine. And I'll be sharing in my newsletter, some more elements that you can really dive into. But what I want to bring to light today is one of my favorite friends for building confidence, for building that sense of self-trust as these antidotes to betrayal and the self-sabotage, right? Because often the patterning that we hold within ourselves is either that lack of confidence, it's the tender moments that we're having, it's the exhaustion, or sometimes it's the lack of trust due to old betrayals. And so for me, when I was looking at this month and the things that I was feeling needed to come forward, right, we're entering into February, and often this is a month where we think about acts of love that we're putting out there. I wanted to think about, in these tender times, you know, how can we fill up this cup? How can we receive before we give? Right? We can't pour from an empty cup. We've all heard this saying, but what does that actually look like in practice? Right? If we're thinking about leading up towards Valentine's Day or these little acts of devotions we're going to do for our loved ones, thinking about this love month, what are the small acts that we can do for ourselves to first build that intimacy, that inner relationship with ourselves, to receive first before we give? And my ally and resource in this quite consistently in my life is Jasmine. Jasmine is an incredible essential oil, especially with the point, the energy center that we'll be combining this with, for restoring and building a sense of trust. I actually pulled the card out of the Manara Oracle deck just as a reiteration. So this says on the bottom, the restorer of trust, right? And often we look at the opposition of trust is acts of betrayal, and whether those were reiterations that we had in our childhood of things that we couldn't lean on, that we couldn't trust, or they've become reiterations or even trauma experiences that we've had within our life that we probably haven't even recognized have become. Okay, I got cut off there, but just reiterating that Jasmine is this restorer of trust. And when we get into this devotion, we have to trust ourselves enough to be able to hold space for ourselves, right? We can find it really easy to show up for others, but it's that showing up for ourselves that often can be really hard. So Jasmine comes in with this incredible floral, and you can give her a little smell. This floral feminine essence, and the left hand, I keep holding my hands up, the left hand, the receptive palm, the ways that we receive, it's our creative essence, our flow, our elements of true alignment. They are all part of the spirited nature of building trust, especially when we combine it with the point that we'd be doing on the wrist. And so I often carry around an element of Jasmine in my purse, whether I need to build confidence before a big meeting, I need to come into the center point of my trust, or if I just need to stop some of the wobbling in my heart to find that equilibrium again. Jasmine, in its sensual nature, it just has this intoxicating sense that to me is the embodiment. Like if I had to think of Jasmine as a human personification, I would think of her. And again, I use pronouns with our plants when I think about the action they're taking. So I'm talking very much about feminine essence. So I'm using the she, her pronouns. I think about her as the woman that you see in a room that you can't quite take your eyes off of. It's the way that she holds her energy. It's the way that she carries herself that is almost intoxicating. And sometimes when we are in those moments of avoidance, what we need is to be intoxicated by the idea of showing up. And Jasmine is my resource for that. And then we're going to combine it with this really powerful point on the wrist that is connected to the pericardium. It's the truth sheath that sits around the heart, this heart shield, this heart wall. And I find that this sensual nature brings this softness, this feminine spirit into that sheath of the heart that creates a true nourishing protection rather than a barrier and a wall that we tend to build up. So what this is going to look like is we're just going to use one drop of Jasmine, and we're going to place it on the wrist, not much different than using perfume. I will name that these are all properly diluted, and I really love this Manara brand that I use almost exclusively in the spa. There's some details down in the show notes. Once you get that one single drop, because a little bit goes a long way, you can hold and press those wrists together for yourself for a moment with me. Maybe even just let the bottle linger up to the nose. Just start to notice what you notice. There can be sensations of temperature, of pulsations, shifts, gurgling, softening. Let's take a big inhale out the mouth. This is a really beautiful invitation to continue the act of devotion. If you want to keep your eyes closed down and let my voice drift away, maybe allowing the oil, the point to marinate for a few more moments, or turning to some journaling if memories or thoughts or emotions were provoked from this. But I really encourage you to allow Jasmine and this pericardium 6, which I didn't name a specific point, to become a part of your acts of devotion for this month and maybe the next season of your experience. So I wish you all a beautiful journey, and I hope you venture well.